FIFA is now canceling about 2,000 of its reserved hotel rooms in Philadelphia.
A report that was released in March of 2025 projected that international tourism in the United States would increase 6.5% in 2025 and another 10% in 2026. And that did not happen in 2025, did it?
Imagine you spend years planning the biggest party in your country's history. You book the venues, you sell the tickets, you promise the world it will be the most spectacular event ever staged. You tell your citizens it will generate $30 billion and tens of thousands of jobs. Then, 5 weeks before the doors open, the hotels are empty, airlines are canceling flights, and the guests are quietly deciding they would rather stay home. That is not a hypothetical. That is where the 2026 FIFA World Cup in the United States actually stands right now. Welcome to Global Sketch, where we follow the data, not the hype. If this kind of evidence-based breakdown is what you are here for, subscribe right now. Let us get into the numbers. Let us start with the single most revealing data set in this entire story: hotel bookings. The American Hotel and Lodging Association conducted a survey of its members across the 11 U.S. cities set to host World Cup matches. The results were published just weeks before the tournament begins. Nearly 80% of hotels in those host cities reported that current bookings are tracking below their original forecasts. Not slightly below, significantly below. In 9 of the 11 host cities, reservation rates are coming in well under expectations. In some individual cases, that shortfall is reported to be as severe as 95% below projected demand. To be absolutely clear about what a 95% shortfall means, it means a hotel that prepared for 100 rooms of World Cup-driven bookings has filled approximately 5 of them. That is not underperformance. That is a structural failure of demand. The American Hotel and Lodging Association's own statement tried to maintain optimism, expressing hope that released inventory would be absorbed as the tournament draws closer. But that optimism runs directly against the market behavior we are seeing. FIFA itself released approximately 70% of its reserved hotel room blocks back to the open market. Organizations do not release 70% of reserved hotel capacity because demand is overwhelming. They release it because expected demand has not materialized. That release, in turn, triggered a cascade of cancellations and put further downward pressure on host city hotel revenues. To add another layer, Oxford Economics, one of the most respected economic forecasting firms in the world, released an analysis projecting that World Cup host metro areas would see some GDP growth this summer, primarily in the leisure and hospitality sectors. But their own report noted that this growth will not have a material impact on the country's overall jobs and economic gains for the year. A $30 billion promised boom, reduced by Oxford Economics to a figure that will not move the national needle. That is a significant recalibration of expectations. Here is a dimension of this story that is not getting nearly enough attention. The World Cup is not a domestic event. It does not work like the Super Bowl, which draws from a concentrated geographic area over a single weekend. The 2026 tournament runs for weeks across an entire continent, requiring millions of international travelers to get on planes from dozens of countries and actually arrive. And right now, the global aviation system is under serious strain. The core issue is jet fuel. The ongoing conflict in the Middle East has disrupted supply chains and driven jet fuel costs to levels that are making routes economically unviable for some carriers. A flight route that was marginally profitable at $70 per barrel of oil becomes impossible to justify at $200 per barrel. Airlines do not run unprofitable routes out of goodwill. They cancel them. The United Kingdom, as one example, imports approximately 65% of its jet fuel, a substantial portion of which flows through Middle Eastern supply chains. British aviation authorities have been working with refineries to maximize domestic production capacity and are evaluating whether lower-grade alternative fuel sources can bridge potential shortfalls. That contingency planning is telling. You do not develop contingency plans unless you are genuinely concerned about primary supply. Air Canada, one of the key international carriers connecting North American travelers to the tournament, announced it was ending 4 seasonal summer routes to the United States ahead of schedule due to rising fuel costs. This came just 1 week after it separately announced the suspension of its service between Toronto and New York's JFK Airport, effective June the 1st. The precise month the World Cup kicks off, WestJet and Air Transat have made similar route cuts in the same period. The pattern is consistent, and it points in the same direction. International air connectivity into World Cup host cities is contracting, not expanding, in the weeks before the tournament begins. For an event that depends on millions of people flying in from around the world, contracting air connectivity is not a minor inconvenience. It is an existential challenge to the entire tourism model the tournament was built on. Even for international fans who can afford the flights and find the hotel rooms, a third barrier has emerged that is proving deeply difficult to navigate: the question of whether they will actually be allowed in, treated fairly when they arrive, and kept safe throughout the tournament. Amnesty International has formally raised concerns about the environment surrounding the 2026 World Cup across all 3 host nations. In the United States, the organization cited deportation data showing that more than 500,000 people were removed from the country in a single recent year. To provide scale for that number, MetLife Stadium in New Jersey, which will host the World Cup final, has a capacity of approximately 82,000 people. Amnesty has called on FIFA to seek formal assurances from the US government that immigration enforcement operations will not be conducted in and around World Cup venues, and that peaceful protests by fans will be protected. The organization has also called for the lifting of travel restrictions currently affecting fans from several participating nations, including Senegal, Ivory Coast, Haiti, and Iran. And it has specifically raised the safety of LGBTQ fans traveling to the United States, which is a significant concern given the current policy environment. Beyond the United States, Amnesty flagged ongoing concerns in Mexico around criminal gang activity and the extraordinary security mobilization that followed. 100,000 security personnel deployed for the tournament, including 20,000 from the military. In Canada, the organization raised concerns that efforts to present clean and orderly host cities could result in the displacement of homeless people in the lead-up to matches. The cumulative picture painted by Amnesty is of a tournament where the question for many potential travelers is not just, can I afford to go, but will I be safe? Will I be admitted? And will my rights be respected if I do? The political stakes around this World Cup are unusually high, and understanding them is essential to understanding why the demand collapse is being treated as such a serious problem. This tournament was positioned from the beginning as a showcase event for the current US administration. The logic was straightforward: host the world's biggest sporting event, fill the country with international visitors, generate billions in economic activity, demonstrate to the world that the United States is the destination of choice, open, prosperous, magnetic. The White House created a dedicated task force for the tournament. Senior government figures were placed in visible leadership roles alongside FIFA. The trophy ceremony was structured to give the administration a prominent role in the tournament's most watched moment. It was designed to function as a global advertisement for American greatness. What is emerging instead is something quite different. When conservative media outlets that typically provide favorable coverage begin running headlines about a $30 billion tourism boom being in trouble, the political calculus changes. When hotel associations in host cities are issuing careful statements about hoping demand will materialize rather than celebrating overwhelming bookings, something has gone wrong with the narrative. And the timing is particularly awkward because the economic data surrounding the tournament is arriving alongside broader indicators, showing declining public confidence in economic management. A Fox News poll, Fox News, not a hostile outlet, found for the first time in more than a decade that Americans trust the opposing party on the economy more than the current administration. That is a significant data point. It reflects a broader anxiety about prices, fuel costs, and day-to-day affordability that the World Cup was supposed to counterbalance with a wave of optimism and economic activity. Instead, the tournament is arriving into an environment of economic anxiety, and its own preliminary data is reinforcing rather than relieving that anxiety. Let us consolidate the data picture here, because the individual numbers tell one story, but their combination tells a much larger one. 80% of host city hotels tracking below forecast. 95% reservation shortfalls in individual cases. Oxford Economics projecting growth that will not move the national economic needle. FIFA releasing 70% of its reserved hotel inventory. Air Canada suspending JFK service from June the 1st. Multiple additional Canadian and European carriers cutting routes. Jet fuel costs threatening route viability across the continent. Amnesty International formally requesting FIFA seek government assurances about immigration enforcement at venues. 500,000 deportations in a single year from a country hosting the World Cup final. What these numbers collectively describe is a tournament that was planned for a world that no longer quite exists. It was planned assuming relatively stable geopolitics, predictable travel costs, welcoming immigration policy, and a global appetite for coming to the United States. Each of those assumptions has been tested or broken in the months since the planning was done. The result is not a catastrophic collapse. The tournament will happen, matches will be played, some fans will attend. But the gap between what was promised and what is being delivered is wide, documented, and growing harder to explain away as temporary hesitation or last-minute booking patterns. Here at Global Sketch, we always try to pull the analysis back to the most important underlying question. And in this case, that question is this: what does it mean when the world's most watched sporting event becomes a referendum on a country's global standing? The World Cup was supposed to demonstrate that the United States remains the world's premier destination, that the planet wants to come here, spend here, celebrate here. The early data suggests something more complicated is happening. International demand is softer than projected. Travel logistics are deteriorating rather than improving in the weeks before the tournament. Fans from multiple nations face genuine uncertainty about whether they will be admitted, treated fairly, or kept safe. This is not simply a logistics problem or an economics problem. It is a perception problem. And perception, once it shifts, is extraordinarily difficult to reverse. The $30 billion projection was always partly a statement about how the world views the United States as a destination. The emerging reality of those hotel booking numbers is a different kind of statement, quieter, less dramatic, but made by millions of individual travelers, each making their own private decision about where they would rather spend their time and their money. That is the data that matters most, not the official projections, not the press releases, the actual choices that actual people are making. And right now, a meaningful share of them are choosing somewhere else. That is the story Global Sketch is tracking. Subscribe so you do not miss what the numbers show us next.